Sorry that I can't be in school again today. It's a bummer that I keep missing so much class. But I just want to give you or show you a short video about what I'd like us to do in class today. Now, just like I've been saying pretty much every time we've met, it's really going to be all about the details. All right? And today we're going to look at really two things. So the first thing we're going to look at is what I would call proper coding etiquette. So obviously this class is called what? Computer Science 1. And it's called computer science just in general because this really is a science. And just like any science, you have to be very precise, right? If you're doing some sort of experiment and you just change something the slightest little bit, your experiment's no longer going to be valid. So it is a science, absolutely, in that sense. I love the problem solving that's a part of computer science. But I would say it's also an art form, right? Writing code is not just a matter of getting something that works and saying, well, it's done. It does what it's supposed to do. But it's also about writing code that is nice to look at, right? I mean, I know that probably sounds silly to you, but we want to learn how to write code that's so well written that you should want to print it out and put it on your refrigerator. Okay, so today, I mean, that's something that we'll talk about all year long, right? As long as we're in the class, I'll be talking about that sort of stuff. But today, I want to just get you started with some of the really foundational concepts that we should follow in order to make our code, again, not just work, but be well written. So the things that I'm going to show you at first aren't necessary in the sense that your code, again, will compile, it will run, even if you don't do these things. But they're things that I'm going to expect you to do because I want you all to learn to be a really good, solid programmer, somebody um, like writing code that would fit into the coding community and people will be impressed by it. And I will say, I've had many students come back from college, studying computer science and say that their teachers have explicitly stated like how nicely their students are writing code. And there's a lot to that. Again, we'll be looking at it throughout the year, but that's what we're going to start with today. The second thing I want to look at is, once again, reading values in from the console. So declaring variables, reading in values, I guess, are the two main CS concepts that we'll look at today. So a total of three, just coding etiquette and structure, declaring variables, reading in values. If you can do those three things by the end of the day, then you're in a really good spot. If you have any questions or something's unclear, then we got to fill out those gaps in. All right, so I'm going to be doing an example here. I'm going to primarily be working in Eclipse, but I'll flip back a little and forth a little bit between Eclipse and Ripple if you're working in Ripple. So although I will say, if you haven't installed Eclipse yet, let's get that installed ASAP, and you can do it today. In fact, you know what? I'm not going to show you how to do it in Ripple because I'm just going to expect that everybody can get Eclipse installed today, and then we'll go from there today or tomorrow. All right, so with that being said, let's get started. All right, so again, to start a project in Eclipse, it's not difficult. So I want everybody to be able to do this. Everybody's going to need to know how to do this. Everybody can absolutely do this, right? So it's super simple. First thing you need to do is right-click over here in the Project Explorer. Now, when you do this, sometimes it will give you two options in this little project section. It might say Java project as well as project, or in my case, it only says project. I genuinely don't know why. I think, well, I have an idea, but regardless, it's okay to hit, if you have Java project as an option, click on that. If you don't, just click on project. If you click on project, there's just the one extra step that you need to, expand the Java folder and click on Java project and then hit next. It will take you to this screen. If you have the option for Java project, you'll just go directly to this screen. All right, so I'm going to call this project user input. It's similar name to the project we did the other day in class. That's okay if it's named something very similar to what we did. It can't just can't be named the exact same thing. It doesn't necessarily matter if you name the project exactly what I name it either. Okay, second thing, this is vitally important, is we want to change the Java, the JRE that we're using, the execution environment. So I think by default, again, it would say something like Java SE 13. We want to switch to 1.8. Okay, if you don't make that change, you're going to have some definite issues. After you're done with that, hit finish, and you'll have your new project. All right, so now that we have our new project, I'm going to expand it over in the Project Explorer, Again, you've got this system library folder. Just ignore it. We won't do anything in there. And then we have an SRC folder. This SRC is short for source. This is where we're going to put all of our source code. Okay, so I'm going to select it and then do right click and a new class. Now the name of our class is very important. We want to make sure that we're using upper camel casing when we name our class. This is kind of the first thing when we talk about just using proper etiquette when we code that we want to follow, right? We always name classes using upper camel case. What does upper camel case mean? Well, it means, first of all, that we start with a uppercase letter, right? So I'm going to name my class user input main. The camel case part comes into, well, the camel case part is like whenever you put more than one word together, when you crunch multiple words together, you always capitalize the first letter in each word. You can't put spaces, right? We talked about that when we talked about identifiers. So camel casing, just like a camel has humps, right? The idea is very simple. When you put words together, you uppercase the first letter in each word. All right, and then very important, make sure you check that box for public static void main string args, and that is it. I now have my class. Right, so now that we have our class, let's look at what's inside of it. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of this little line of code. That is just a comment. We'll talk about comments eventually. And I should say I'll be typing a bunch of comments in my code just to help you all out. You do not need to put comments in your code. But let's look at these containers, right? There's two containers in this class already. And we haven't really done much of any coding. We haven't done any coding, right? The first is our main method. You'll notice that the main method starts right there with that curly brace and ends with this closing brace. And you can kind of tell it in clips because look, I mean, when I mouse over that, it shows the main method. But also when I just click on that closing brace, it highlights or puts a square box around the opening brace that corresponds to it. Look, and this is like formatting 101, right? Look how this closing brace lines up vertically with the main method that is closing, right? It should always look like this. I don't want to ever see something like that, right? Or like that, where I've got multiple closing braces on the same level of indentation, right? It should always look like this, where the structure that brace is closing is lined up horizontally with the structure itself, right? So again, I've got opening and closing, and everything that we're going to type here needs to be inside of this main method. Okay. Here's our second structure. We've got our class, public class user input main. Okay. This class starts right here and ends at this closing brace. Again, if I kind of mouse over it, I'm not sure exactly how to get it to show up. There we go. Right. You can see that the class pops up, right? So this brace, again, is closing this structure. And once again, you'll notice, hopefully, that the brace lines up vertically with the class that it is closing. So I should never see something like that, right? Everything should be lined up perfectly. Should never see this, right? Two closing braces on the same line. Now you have no idea what brace is closing what. And right now our code is pretty simple. But I promise we're going to get into much, much more advanced structures where you might have like 5 or 6 of these things. And if you don't line them up properly, you'll have no idea what structure each of these braces is closing. So that's the starter, right? I expect our indenting to always look like this, where we have braces lined up with what they're closing. If you delete braces, if you add braces, it's not going to work. All right, so that's that. Let's move on now to our actual code. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to declare 3 variables, ask the user to enter values for each of these variables, and read the values in. Okay, so, oops, can't spell values apparently. I'm going to give you an example that does these 3 things, and then you're going to create your own program that does this as well, and then The final thing that you're going to do is you're going to submit your code to a Google form that I have and answer a couple of questions about it. Okay, so that's what we need to do today. All right, so first of all, let's declare our scanner. Now, scanner is a class, which we'll talk about eventually, that allows us to easily read values in from the user. Oops, and I made a mistake. This needs to be a capital S, excuse me. So right here, I know we've talked about this in class the other day. I'm declaring a variable on the left-hand side. The name of this variable, or the variable's identifier, is S. Its type is a scanner. So I'm saying scanner S is equal to a new scanner. Now you don't need to know what's going on the right-hand side here in much detail, but I'll just tell you, like, the shorthand version of it is I'm creating an actual scanner object. This is on the right-hand side is a scanner. A scanner is a thing that allows us to read values in from the console. So I'm declaring it, and I'm doing what is called initializing or instantiating that scanner, I should say. All right, so for right now, it's okay, just copy this line down verbatim. You don't have to fully understand what's going on, but you'll need it. Now I've got errors, and this is why, because I need to import my scanner. Now import automatically, I think it's Command-Shift-O. Yeah, in Eclipse, if you do Command-Shift-O, Eclipse will add in the imports that you need. Now, the reason we have to import the scanner class, unlike a lot of the other things we work with, is because it's not a part of the standard Java library. So if you ever want to use a scanner, you have to import it, and that's how you do it. And again, capitalization, all that sort of stuff is super important. Okay, so I have my scanner declared. That's the first thing I need to do, and I'll maybe put a little comment next above it. Declare my scanner so that I can read values from the console. I'll probably spell console wrong. There we go. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to do. Okay, now number 2 is we're going to declare all of our other variables. Okay, so I said that we're going to need 3 variables, and the first variable that we're going to declare is first name. Now you'll notice here that I'm using camel casing, right? This is lower camel casing. The variables should always start with a lowercase letter. Classes start with an uppercase letter. Variables start with a lowercase letter, right? They're compressed together. So I'm using a capital M because of the camel, it's 2 words being crunched together. Also, I'm not doing shorthand. I see students doing things like this all the time, like FN, right? Or F name, or just, N for name. No, I'm going to expect us to properly identify our variables and not use shorthand. Okay, so some things like fully, writing it out, first name. It's not difficult to type it out. So let's make sure we do. All right, that's our first variable. The second variable that we're going to declare is going to be age. So I'm going to say int age. And the third is going to be a double, and I'm going to call it height. As you can probably guess, I'm going to ask the user to enter their first name, their age, and their height. Okay, so I declared all my variables. All right, the third step is ask user to enter values for each of these variables, and at the same time we're going to read the values in. Okay, so let's just get to it. All right, so I'm going to say syso, and then if I do control space, it replaces it with system.out.println, and I'm going to simply say, what is your first name? Okay, and that will, of course, print that sentence to the console. And now I need to read in their first name. So I'm going to say first name is equal to, right? I'm getting ready to set my first name equal to a value. My first name variable is going to be equal to a value. Now, what value do I want it to be equal to? Well, obviously, I want it to be equal to a value that the user is going to enter. And I have to use my scanner to get that value. So I'm going to say s dot. So S is my scanner. I'm using a method from my scanner, and I'm going to start typing, and I'm just going to say next line. Now, the next line might be a little confusing because of what we did in last class. You might expect it to say something like next string, But when we want to read a string in from the console, we're generally going to use next line. Okay, so that's that. I'll have read in my first name. Okay, now I'm going to do SYSO again, and I'll say, how old are you? Okay, there it is, and I'll say what age is equal to S dot. So once again, I'm setting my variable equal to a value that they're going to enter. Now age is an integer, so I'm going to have to use next int. So age equals S dot next int. Okay. Got one more to go, so I'll say SYSO. How tall are you? And once again, I'll say what height is equal to S dot next double. So height is a double, so I'm going to use S dot next double. All right. And I mean, that's really kind of it for our code, right? So I'm just declaring variables, asking the user to enter values, and reading those values in. If you can do this, you're in a good spot. If you can't, then we're going to need to take some steps. Now, last thing I'm going to do is just revisit the idea. Well, I guess I could run it. Yeah, let me run it just to show you what it's going to look like, right? So when I hit run, you should say, what is your first name? It's Thomas. How old are you? 44. How tall are you? 5'9", which is what, 5.75. And that's it. It's not going to print any of those values back out. We'll learn how to do that next time. But for right now, that's what my program should look like. Okay, so again, let's revisit the formatting and all that sort of stuff here. Now, if your formatting was off for some reason, right, you've got things all over the place, so this makes me a little sick to my stomach to even do this, right? This is what you see a lot where students are just like over in the gutters all the time, right? That's what that left-hand side is called, gutter. All right, so if your code looks like this, Eclipse has a really nice built-in feature where you can just say what? Command A to select everything. Right? Command A to select everything. Command I to indent everything. So Command A to select, Command I to indent. Now this isn't perfect because you can see I've got like multiple statements on one line, so I have to fix that myself. If I had my braces on the same line, it wouldn't fix that either, but it will at least give you a good start. Okay, so that's the first thing. Again, make sure it's properly indented. Second thing that we want to do is make sure that we're chunking code. And what do I mean by chunking code? Well, I mean putting breaks between different processes that you're working through, right? So when we read books, books are broken up into paragraphs, or any sort of writing is broken up into paragraphs, and books are broken up into chapters and units and all that sort of stuff, right? The reason why that's done is because it makes it easier for you to read, right? Can you imagine reading War and Peace without any sort of paragraph or chapter breaks? I think it would probably hurt your brain, right? But when you start putting those breaks in, it just helps us to be able to process what's going on in the writing. Well, it's the same thing with our code. We don't want all of our code just to be crunched together. And again, right now I recognize that there's not a whole lot in our code, but once we get more advanced, we're going to start writing programs that have hundreds of lines of code, right? Even thousands. So we want to get in the habit right away of putting nice breaks in our code. And what do I mean by that? Again, you'll notice that I'm breaking my code up into different, I'll say, thoughts, right? My first thought is just to get my scanner declared so I can use it later, right? My second thought is to declare all of my other variables that I'm going to use throughout the program. Third thought, I mean, this is kind of like a process that has 3 steps. So I broke those steps out from the other code, but also broke them up from each other. So here I'm asking the user enter values and reading in the values that they enter, but I'm also doing that 3 times. So I'm putting a little break in between each of the 3. So this is what, again, I call chunking your code, and something I'm going to expect everyone to do. Okay, so that's what our code should look like. Let me just mention quickly, if you're writing something in Ripple, and I'm hoping this will work. Ripple's being really slow today. It's not even responding. Well, anyway, if you're working in Ripple, there's a little icon at the top right-hand corner of your code that looks a whole lot like the left justified icon in something like Microsoft Word, if you click that little icon, and I don't know why this isn't working at all. Anyway, if you click on that little icon, that will auto indent for you, okay? And I should mention, if you do not have Eclipse installed yet because maybe you're remote today and Ripple is not cooperating, you can go to Google and just search online Java IDE, and there are a bunch of options out there. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to work in Ripple or Eclipse. I don't know what CodeChef is like, but there's all sorts of them out there, right? So this was C++. I don't know, right? You can work with anything. Okay, so all right, let's look at what we need to do now. And this is getting a bit longer than I intended for it to be. All right, so I just wrote a program that declared 3 variables, asked user to enter values for each, and read the values in. You're now going to repeat the process that we just went through on your own, okay? So that means you're going to create a new Java project. You're going to create a new Java project. Name it something similar to user input, maybe my user input practice, something along those lines. Once you create the project, you're going to add a new class. So we've added a new class here called user input main.java. Inside of your class, you're going to write code that does just this. Declares 3 variables, asks the user to enter values for each of these variables, and reads the values in. And I should say we want the values or the variables to be your variables should include a string, a double, and an int. Okay, so you need those 3 different types. So again, you're going to write or create a project that does just this. So you're going to think up your own string, your own integer, your own double, name them appropriately, ask the user to enter values, just like I did here. You're not doing first name, just think of something else. Maybe more creative than doing like last name, right? It's up to you, but you're going to think of a string, an int, and a double, ask the user to enter them, and then read the values in. After you've done that, so again, you're basically redoing what we just did now, you're going to go to the Google form that I'll have linked on my Blackboard, and you're going to fill out the form based on the code that you just wrote. So you're going to start with your name. That's obvious, not Mr. Swoper, Mr. Swope. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to copy and paste all of your code here. So I'm going to go back to my project, Command A, Command C, and I'm going to paste all of my code right there. Okay, so that's the first question. And then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yes or no questions. And you're just going to go through and you're going to answer these questions about your code. And these are the questions that I'm going to ask myself when I grade your project. Okay, so these are the questions I'm going to ask myself when I grade your project. I'm going to look up here at your code just like you are and say, okay, did they indent correctly? And as I'm looking at my code, I'd say, yep, it looks like I've got my main class lining up with my closing brace, my main methods inside of my main class, and it lines up. Everything inside of my main method is, I guess, correctly or evenly indented. I've got this values kind of wrapping around, but that's no big deal. That's just, again, wrapping from the previous line of comments. Okay, so it looks to me like everything's properly indented, so I'll hit yes. Code is chunked. Yeah, we just talked about that, so I won't talk about it again, but you can see my code is chunked, so I'll hit yes. Variable names are descriptive and correctly capitalized using camel case, i.e. first name. Absolutely, right? First name, age, height. Age and height don't really need camel casing, but they do start with lowercase letters. So I'll say once again yes, and your variable declares a string. Variable asks the user to enter. Next question is your program declares a double variable, asks the user to enter. And the final one is your program declares an integer variable, and same deal, right? So I did all 3 of those in my example, so I'm going to hit yes for all 3 and then hit submit, and that's it, right? So I know this video was a bit lengthy. I apologize for that. There's just a lot that I wanted to get through. I hope to be back soon to see everybody. I'm really sorry that I've been out so much. It's a bummer. I don't enjoy missing class time. because I want to be there with you guys teaching such a great and exciting and important topic. So hopefully I'll be back soon. In the meantime, let's just try to do our best with what we've got, and hope you have a great day.